Hello and welcome to NYFA's Webinar Wednesdays, a weekly virtual series specifically designed for Nebraska communities and housing partners. Today's topic is how small rural communities can leverage funding. I'm Joe Spitzen, Assistant Manager of the Regional Housing Accelerator Program at the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority. Due to the pandemic, NYFA is postponing its 2021 Annual Housing Innovation Marketplace Conference until March 28th, 29th, and 30th, 2022. In its absence, we will be bringing you this series of webinars throughout 2021. Our speakers today are Cliff Mesner of Mesner Development and John Madsen of William Krotter Company. Also with us behind the scenes is Susan Poulos, NYFA's Outreach and Community Development Administrator. Susan will be helping to monitor the chat and answer questions. We would like attendees to save all questions until the end of the presentations. You can use the question feature at the bottom to input your questions, and NYFA staff will hold those until the end of the presentations. If you would prefer to ask your questions out loud, simply raise your hand and we can unmute you. But keep in mind the webinar is being recorded and will be available online. Just a quick bit of housekeeping before we start. I'd like to remind everybody that the Emergency Rental Assistance Program is live statewide, save for the parts of Douglas County that are outside Omaha city limits. For more information, to include learning how to apply based on your location, please go to coronavirus.nebraska.gov. Our first speaker today is Cliff Mesner, Mesner Development. Cliff is a 1978 graduate of the University of Nebraska College of Law and has been involved in community economic development work in Central City and throughout rural Nebraska for over 25 years. Serving as the city attorney and the economic development director for Central City taught Cliff the importance of housing to the growth of communities. He has experience in subdivision development, infrastructure extensions, affordable and market rate housing, spec housing, and new neighborhood program design. He has worked with local, state, and federal agencies to bring public housing dollars to small towns in Nebraska and Kansas. Cliff also has experience in commercial real estate, including the development of several new motels. All right, Cliff, the floor is yours, sir.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen here if I can. And hopefully people are seeing our logo there.
Looks good to me.
We're going to talk today about leveraging local funds. And I wanted to start off with this screen. This is a list of sources of funds that Mesner Development Company has used over the last 10 years for housing projects across Nebraska and Kansas. We work all across the two states. We generally spend our time in smaller communities, but that is getting redefined as we go. It's harder and harder to build in smaller towns. So we've kind of had to restructure as things happen. I've divided these sources of funds into two boxes. The boxes on the left are all competitive. You have the low-income housing tax credits and a whole series of gap funding underneath that, state housing credits, community development block grant, NYFA programs, the Affordable Housing Trust Funds, and the Rural Workforce Housing Fund. Those are all competitive applications that require your community to compete with every other community in the state in order to get funding. Today, we want to spend most of our time talking about what's in the box on the right and how that might relate to the box on the left. The box on the right are all funding programs that can be done within your community. You don't need to have, you don't need to have state approval for LB 840 or your city utility funds, tax increment financing, what you do privately with spec builders, your own investment groups, those sorts of things. Those are all local decisions. And I want to start by talking about how those might impact what you're doing. And I'm going to start off initially talking about investment clubs, and then I'm going to relate that back to the Rural Workforce Housing Fund. In Central City, we found ourselves in a spot 20-some years ago where we had done a good job of having a county foundation that had been started 60 years ago. We had put in place LB 840 and tax increment financing. We had done the public sources of income, the charitable foundation. What we were missing was just pure venture capital, money that people would gather together and put at risk. And what we did was we set out some letters, called people together, and said, what do we do? And what the community decided it wanted to do was do an investment club that would just raise money monthly, so that they'd have money available when a project was proposed. We started putting $100 in the pot every month. There were 23 of us when we started. And I know that doesn't sound like much, but I think we've raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000 over the years by doing that, $100 a piece every month. So it started to add up. The mission of the club is to make investments in the community, which will be beneficial both to the membership and to the community as a whole. So what we were trying to do was to find ways that the club can make a little profit, and help the community out. And we tried to stay with the profit motive because we thought if we did, that people would stay with it long term, and they have. This club's actually been going for, I think, 30 years now. The goal served. We have cash available when we need it. There's almost always cash in the bank. There's 300,000 sitting in the bank today. We have a proposal that may be coming to us, and we don't have to go. It also spreads the risk, because if we take make some efforts to do something that is high risk and we lose some money, that gets spread out pretty thin and nobody ever notices it. It also provides a broader base for community involvement, so that we have more and more people who are supporting a project, involved with a project, and in small towns, that's really helpful to make things work. I'm going to give you a couple of examples based on providing shelter. The first project we did was a motel. We hadn't had a motel built in the community since right after World War II. We had nothing modern. We decided we needed to go build something. Decided we were going to build a Super 8 motel. And this actually came to us when somebody in the community just came in and said, I got to have a motel. My business can't work here without a motel. I've got to have one. So we put the investment club together and went out and built a motel, which is an important thing for communities for lots of other economic development issues. The second thing we did on the housing side was Cottonwood Estates. And this is an assisted living facility in Central City. And one of the things that you'll find in a lot of your smaller towns is that you literally have seniors that are trapped in a 3-bedroom home. They're in a 3-bedroom home that they don't want to take care of anymore. They don't want to scoop the walker or worry about mowing the lawn, but there's no place for them to go that they really want to go to. There's no modern assisted living facility. And Cottonwood filled that void, and suddenly we had 40 people who were moving into this facility and selling their homes in the community. We were rolling that housing stock, and that was allowing us to get more housing. The third one that I would point out is Central City Home Builders. And what happened with Central City Home Builders was a group of people in town decided that they wanted to start building housing. And they said, let's put together a pool of money and we'll go out and start building spec housing and sell the housing. we're not going to try and make a lot of money. We just want to try to hold our money together. We'd like to make enough to kind of keep up with inflation so we can keep building housing. They went to the investment club and said, can you start it off? Can you give us the first 50,000? We said, of course. The money's always in the bank, so we threw 50,000 into it. All the banks in the community participated, some realtors, some builders. We put some money in, and we went out and said, let's build a spec house and see what happens. The first home sold about break even. The next homes were all selling, making a few $1,000s. Usually made between $5,000 and $6,000 on the sale of a house. And we started to have a need to build them quicker. So the home builders group came back to the investment club and said, could you provide the cash to build a second house? And we said, sure, because again, we had money sitting there. So we went ahead and made a loan on the second house, and we would just split the profit on the house and go from there. So on one of the houses, we got half the profit. On the other house, we got our percentage of the profit for what we had invested. The program really was successful for us. We ran it, I think, 5 or 6 years. We built 16 homes, added $3.2 million to the tax base and $45,000 a year in local taxes. But the most important thing that it did was that it proved it could be profitable to build housing in Central City. And what happened was spec builders saw that we were building homes successfully, and they decided, well, if they can do it, we can do it. And they started, we had a couple of spec builders who just showed up and started building. And they're young guys that worked from dawn until dark, and they were building them better and faster. And there really wasn't any need for the home builders group to be there anymore. So we just evaporated the club and told the guys to go on. Here's my contact information. We've started clubs all across the state of Nebraska. We're still doing that. And if people want some information, we can provide that, including some forms and some other things to simplify that process. The second program I want to talk about today is the Rural Workforce Housing Fund. This was created in 2017 with an allocation of $7 million. That $7 million ended up being leveraged out and building $71 million in new housing, 577 new households. So the state last year decided to fund it again, and they put another $10 million into the funding, which is, those applications are in, will be announced at the end of the month. But we have a real hope that this thing will be turned into a permanent program next year. And I think if this year is successful, there's very good reason to believe that the state will make it a permanent program. I'm really pushing this program because I think it does lots of things that we can't do with any of the other programs we have. The advantages that it has is that workforce is a broad term, and it's dramatically different in one community than in another. And this program allows a community to build a program to its needs. A lot of times when we're doing housing, we feel like we're trying to pitch a corner of the market, or we're trying to fit, a lot of times we feel like we're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. This program is far more flexible than that. In the first place, it's not income restricted. There's a restriction on the value of the housing built, which is $200,000 for rentals, apartments, and $275,000 for homes for sale. And and those are the markets you should be shooting for anyway with workforce housing. But it allows us to build housing for people that are 80 to 120% of area median income. And most of the federal and state programs are limited to people at 60% of area median income. And there's just a real gap in there that we can't fill with those other programs. So I really like this program a lot. I think it just offers a lot for rural communities. The way the program works is you have to have a one-to-one match for the application, and those matching funds can be from individuals that contribute, or businesses, or foundations, or political subdivisions, nonprofits. And it's all put into a single investment fund that is administered by the eligible nonprofit development organization. So you're setting money aside for housing, but that money stays in the community forever and gets to be recycled. Here's what makes the thing magical. You start off raising your local money, and if requested, the local match was matched by NYFA up to $250,000. And then the money raised, including the match by NYFA, was matched by DED. So you would have a situation where you would raise $250,000 in local funds. That would go, NYFA would match that, and DED would match the whole thing. You've turned $250,000 into $1 million. You've quadrupled your money. That's good local leverage. This is an example. This is what we did in Schuyler. An employer, Cargill, put in $200,000. The city put in $150,000 from LBA 40, and they put $300,000 in from the utilities. The banks pitched in some money. They raised $700,000 locally. They could have spent that $700,000 on housing. That's what all these organizations were pushing for. They wanted $700,000. Instead, they took the $700,000, put it into the rural workforce housing program, added $250,000 from NYFA, $810,000 from DED, and suddenly they had $1.75 million. There was $1 million of gift by the way they had organized that. So let's go back and look at our original slide with our source of funds. They took from the right side the things that they could control themselves: LB 840 money, city utility money, money from the commercial banks, and employer contributions, and pulled that money together and applied for rural workforce housing funds to leverage that money out. Now, Holdridge has a real housing problem. They set money aside to do housing. They had $250,000 in their economic development organization. Instead of going out and doing housing with that, they took the $250,000, put it in the rural workforce housing, and leveraged it out to $810,000. Now they have $810,000 instead of $250,000. York did it all with employer contributions. It was all done with donations from people in the community. The City of Hastings did it all with city utility funds and economic development money. The application that Aurora put in this go round was almost all funded by the local foundations that they have in the community. So each community took a different approach because each community had their money available to them on this side in different ways. But they all found ways to take the money that they had there and use that to leverage it out by making application for some of the state funds. if they didn't get state funds, they still have the ability to go ahead and do their housing just from what they have locally. But they've done a great job of leveraging that money out a long ways. We've promoted this program as a way to build a balance sheet. And we're telling communities, don't think of it in terms of a project, but think of it in terms of an ongoing process. All of the money that we had the first round in the 4 communities we worked with, all of it is being paid back. It's going to be used again. They've increased their money dramatically. They now have the balance sheet. They're not giving that money away. They're loaning it out. They're putting it at risk, realizing that they may lose some of it, but the intent is that they'll get it back. And they put it in a revolving loan fund and move it on to the next project. Skylar, for example, did 2 programs with it. They did an apartment building that has a long-term loan on it, and they did some construction financing on some townhomes. The townhomes have been built. That money has all been paid back, and the apartment building is paying the money every month, which they're now recycling and trying to do the next project that needs to be done. So properly used, the money will keep coming back and can continue to be leveraged for workforce housing. That's kind of what I had, and that's kind of an introduction, really, I think, to what John Madsen is going to tell us, because they have managed and recycled money as well as anybody in the state. So I will shut up for a while.
Well, you can speak up anytime that you want, Cliff, while we're going through this. Joe, you got a little introduction of me if you want to give it, but it sounded pretty formal. I don't know if you need to do it or not.
And Joe, you're currently muted.
Thank you, Susan. I will go through the pomp and circumstance for you. Thank you, Cliff. Next up is John Madsen. Hailing from Stewart, Nebraska, John is vice president of William Krotter Company. He has been actively involved in community and economic development since the late 70s, having served on the Stewart Village Board and Stewart Development Corporation. He was the founding chairman of CNED and helped form Central Nebraska Housing and Economic Developers. He remains on the board of directors of both groups. John recently served on the NBA Next Generation Housing Task Force and is a member of the JEDI Task Force. All right, Mr. Madsen, all yours, sir.
Thanks, Joe. I need to go back also to Cliff's first screen, if you can remember, and I think you do. When Stewart got involved with housing, it was back around actually in the late 70s. We had our first project. Housing's always been important to the members of the village of Stewart, and so important that they bought and built their own nursing home back in the early 70s. Still run it today, still owned by the village. Started a group for rental housing with, at that time, it was Farmers Home Administration. Of course, that's morphed into other opportunities now, but we started our first duplex back in 1978. We now, on our Stewart Village Manor group, which was a group of local investors that each put in $100 back in the 70s, we now have 14 units that we rent out. We've built numerous fourplexes and duplexes over the years. We never have a vacancy. We're continuing to have them managed and full, and really excited. I'll show you a picture of one of them in a little while, but that kind of turned into a community that really noticed that housing was important for their people and felt like it was something that they needed to work on. And back in the early 80s, we found out that the town was declared as blighted by HUD because we didn't have sidewalks, and we had a lot of dilapidated houses and vacant lots and no street paving and some things like that. And so we had a high number of priority points from HUD. And it was pointed out to us by DED that if we applied for some funding, that we could probably get some help to do some housing rehabilitation, housing rehab. And so we applied for the maximum amount of money in about 1983, and received a grant for $320,000 from DED to rehabilitate houses in our community. And the first year we rehabilitated 24. We set up at that time, something that was unheard of, a program that they told us to give the money to the folks, but we knew that they were too proud to just take it. So we set it up as a revolving loan fund, had 4 different categories. There was the regular market rate, there was half the regular market rate for the loan. Then there was a deferred, there was a 0% loan for those people whose income didn't allow them to make a monthly payment. Then we had a deferred payback loan, in fact, which we had some little old ladies that were just paying us what they could, maybe $40, $50 a month to pay back the loan. But we secured all that by making certain that if the property sold, that the money was going to come back into the program. So we set up the revolving loan program in about '83, and we've used the thing now for all those years, and we have about 295 houses in our town, 600 people, and we have rehabilitated 110 of those houses substantially. I'm going to show you just a couple of pictures just to kind of give you an idea of what we've done. It's not these are just a couple of samples out of the let's see if I can get that on there. There we go. Here's a couple of examples of some of the houses. You can see the older part of the house back here on this one, and they didn't have a decent entry and kitchen area in behind it. So we put a garage on it and added onto the house. Here's another example of a little old house that needed some rehab and was completely rehabbed. The folks that did that back in the '80s still live in the house. I mean, we have a lot of that. Another example of some rehab, and just 3 or 4 of them that we've done. There's nothing magical about it. At the time, we could put up to around $25,000 into those houses. But the one thing that we did was we didn't just do Band-Aid jobs. We didn't just do weatherization. We took a look at the house and took a look at what it needed for the next generation, so that when we did the work on the house, we did everything from bottom to top and made the house available so that in the future, it could be available to the next generation of people that wanted to come to town. One of the real benefits to that was that we had a number of young people, young men and women that were graduating from trade schools that wanted to work and live in our community, and they moved back and started construction companies back in the early '80s to do a lot of that work. Most of those people are still here today. Sometimes some of them are even in the 2nd, 3rd generation of builders. And it's just amazing how having that amount of money available and the opportunity to do construction work in the community to enhance the housing stock has really paid off for us over the course of the last 40 years. And Cliff always talks about when he tries to rehab a house, he usually does it for himself. He spends a little bit more than he should, and he can't get it to pay out. But if you really are careful with an inspector and rehab the house based upon the basic needs of the house, you can make it a viable property without going overboard. And then after it gets basically done, the people that live there can, with their own private investment, can go ahead and enhance it over the years. And so many people have done that with their houses. They started off with a basic rehab that was done that made it comfortable and affordable, and then they stayed in the home and added onto it, done different expansions. It's been just a terrific thing. The property values in our community have stayed very high over the course of the last 40 years, and a lot of it's been attributed to the fact that we have taken it very seriously about doing the houses and doing them right and thinking about doing it for the next generation. I'm a strong proponent of rehab. I think that we need to continue to do more of it in the state of Nebraska. The infrastructure is already on the block in most of the towns. you got the water, sewer, and streets, etc., and you need to utilize what's there. When we got to a period of time where we had satisfied most of the needs on rehab later in the 80s, the rehab fund, because we had payback and revolving loans on all that stuff, had a few dollars available, and we had some neighborhoods that really were still needing some help. We needed to get some acquisition and demolition done. Hard to find money for that. We did form a nonprofit development corporation at that time. Went to the city, and they loaned us $50,000 to start to build a spec house. So we took an opportunity there and bought some property, put up a spec house, got it sold, slowly developed that program just one at a time. Went through it. I think we built 10 of them over the course of the next 12 or 15 years, about one a year. We went into some neighborhoods that were really in need of help and tore out a bunch of dilapidated properties and trees and junk and put a new house on the block. And noticed that everybody else on the block then was thinking about trying to improve their site too, so that it really made for a nice community. I mean, if you look back over the whole 40 years to what it looked like back then to what it is now, it's remarkable. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and the people are living in comfortable homes. It's amazing to me that of those homes that we build as spec through our development corporation, I think there's only one of them that isn't being lived in by the people that bought it originally. The homes were built well, and so everybody just stayed in their home, and they made their own enhancements to them. I've got an example of that too. I'll do one other one. We had somebody that had a house that needed it was a rehab house, and they liked it so much they wanted to stay in it. So it was a house that looked about like, looked about like this one when it started, and then they decided that they would take that same home, and you can see it back there with the green on it, and turned it into this one. So this part of the house was the original spec house. They wanted to stay in their neighborhood, had 3 children, and decided that we need to have a bigger kitchen, we need to have a bigger garage added onto the house. Really made for a beautiful home after we started with just a basic 1,144 square foot spec house. It's amazing that so many people have kind of taken that house on and stayed with it and kept that neighborhood work moving forward. We've had to partner more lately with other organizations because it got to the point where the cost of construction of some of those homes wasn't quite matching the appraisal values we could get for them. And that was a problem, a big problem for, after, say from 2000, 2010 and up to 2015. And so we started partnering with the Central Nebraska Housing developers through CNED, and we're able to get a couple of grants at that time, once again from the left side of Cliff's first screen. And we were able to build a couple of 3 spec houses there, fill in a couple of other blocks. And what happened was we were able to buy down the difference between the cost of the construction and the appraisal value, because the banks always loan it at the appraised value, but they're not always going to loan it at the completed price. I think some of the houses cost us at that time around $170,000 to build, and they were appraising out about 150, so 155. So it was a little bit of a benefit there. We took some of that grant money and applied it toward that so we can get some more houses built. I've got maybe an example of a couple of those where we went into a couple of neighborhoods, did some infill, and let's see if I got one here. Here we go. This will be a good one. Share the screen and we'll go down here. we're able to build. I'll go to the. Here's a good example of what a street looked like after we got done with it, before and after. I'm on the wrong one. Let's see. We'll get it found here in a second. Too many screens. There we go. This gives us an idea. This is one of the areas that was really an eyesore for us, even after we'd done all of this. I'll just leave it like that. You can see it, but you can see on the left over here, there were two houses on there, both dilapidated, real problems, and we ended up putting a nice little spec house on. Here's the latest one that we did. Gives you a good idea. Somebody tried to burn a house down and didn't complete it, and so we put a nice new spec house on there. And once again, that was a combination of funding from our development corporation and help from CNED to get that done. We're planning to do another one like that. But anyway, the point is that now moving forward, one of the reasons that we worked so hard on getting the workforce housing program going and did the work with the Nebraska bankers on the next generation and trying to get that rural workforce housing in place is because we needed to leverage more dollars. And as Cliff said, you can take some local money that you've already got, apply for those funds, and come up with ways that they can really enhance the number of dollars that you've got available. There's no question that using the LB 840 money, local foundation money, some profit that might be in your local economic development group, whatever it is, you can take that, apply for the funding from rural workforce housing. NIFA has been tremendous in the support that they provided in conjunction with that since that got put together. And it really is a great opportunity for the state of Nebraska and for communities in the state of Nebraska to move forward with their housing needs. We've been blessed because we started that revolving loan program. I think every town should do it. Cliff and I talked the other day about how we like to use the 100-year formula. And you think about that, Stewart's been looked at for a long time as a town that's really done an excellent job in preserving their housing stock and building homes. We've built probably about 35 or 40 new homes in addition to the 110 or so that we've rehabbed in the last 25 years. And if you think about your housing stock lasting, say, 100 years, it means you need to, if you got 200 houses, you need to build 2 houses a year. If you got 290 houses, you need to build almost 3 houses a year. So in the past, as I mentioned, the past 25 years or so, we built 35 to 37 new houses. We're about 1.5. We're about 1.5 per year, and we should be at 3. And we're considered successful, and we're only halfway there. Now, what about the communities that haven't done anything as far as housing is concerned? Haven't had a housing board, haven't had a rehab board, haven't promoted housing and just left it up to private enterprise to do it. It's not cutting the mustard. And that's why we've got such a problem in the state of Nebraska, such a shortage. And we need these type of programs to continue to build our communities and make decent places and safe places for our families to live in and make a living and be members of a community. And it's a big job, but we're trying to provide the tools to keep it going in the future. Cliff, I'm gonna let you jump in. I know you heard 2 or 3 things you wanted to talk about there.
Well, I wanted to ask you, John, the rural workforce housing has really 3 limitations that are there. New housing, 275,000 houses for sale, 200,000 for rentals. And on rehabs, the rehabs have to be 50% of the value of the home. And I wanted your opinion on that 50% number. Is that too high? Should this be made available to people who want to do 25% of the value of the home? I mean, they're trying to create new housing, not just window dressing. And I understand that's why that is, but you have so much more experience in that than.
You're talking about 25 or 50% of the current value of the home, or the
Yes,
completed value of the home?
current value of the home.
I've felt for a long time that the cost of rehab funds that were available and assistance that was available has lagged too far behind, because it costs a little bit more to do it. And I for a long time, DED had a $25,000 limit on rehab when we were doing that, and $25,000 isn't going to cut the mustard anymore. And I've been promoting that it be 50,000 for quite a while, and they may have raised it lately, and I don't know about it. But you need to put the amount of money into the home that it takes to make it a next generation house. And every house is different, and the cost in different communities is different. So our rehab inspector and our rehab board make all those decisions, and they've been very active. We've had a rehab inspector in our community since 1983, still have one. They look at the applications. The rehab board follows along with their recommendation and tries to put together a package that is affordable and takes a look at the. There we go. Cheryl's in there. Substantial rehab only cost of rehab has to exceed 50% of the current assessed value. So that's good. I think that's probably a good number. I think 50% is probably a good number, and I have to do a little bit more studying on it because I'm not familiar with it. But I want to make sure that there's enough money there to fix the house up substantially. There are enough of these programs to just put a Band-Aid on a house, but they don't help you. They don't do anything. They're just so tenuous. They put a little bit of a fix for the local people at the present time, but you got to take a look at having that housing stock for the next generation, because that house is still going to be there. I mean, it costs too much to tear it down. If you don't fix it up right, why it's not going to be viable in the future. I don't know how to end my summation. I guess basically I'm pleased that we're having continued conversation about improving the housing stock. It's really key to the state of Nebraska, other states too, obviously. But I mean, we've let ours lag a lot, and I go to some of these communities, and I've been in the same community 3 or 4 times talking about starting a program, trying to get some things done. And then I walk away and nothing happens. And then I get a call from the same community 4 years later. Would you come back and talk to us again? Yeah, how many times can I come back and talk to you about it? I mean, you need to do it yourself. You need to get in there, get a group together, and deal with your community and help your local people. One of the things that I had this conversation again yesterday. One of the things that we did recently was we did the nuisance abatement program, and we were serious about it. We did the north side of town, and people were like, they're really doing that, and they're making us clean up this junk. And we did. And we went to the south side of town. We didn't have to hardly do anything because a year later, because they found out we were serious. But some communities have a problem with that, because the local leaders sometimes are the ones that have a nuisance, and so they can't get it. They're so afraid that somebody's going to get mad, or if you got a local businessman on the village board or the city council, oh, we're not going to do nuisance abatement because they'll be mad at me and they'll take business away from me. The only people that are upset about nuisance abatement are the people that have nuisances. The people that don't have nuisances love nuisance abatement, and they want you to do the right thing and get your town straightened up and get rid of some of that stuff that is creating problems in the neighborhoods. Don't be afraid of it. If it's gonna affect your your pocketbook because you're on the village board. Let somebody else do it. You're doing a disservice to your community if you're afraid to do the right thing. And I'm gonna end with that one. That one's got that's been getting on my nerves for the last 6 months or so. So
I don't think it's possible to overstate the importance of local leadership on this.
impossible.
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 We work all across 2 states, and the communities that are getting it done, the common thread is just the local leadership. And there's just, it's a waste of time if you don't have that local leadership doing it. So it all starts right there.
Yeah, and so many communities are really blessed that they have excellent local leaders. And don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions and find out other opportunities. You have to. It changes all the time. I remember I did this presentation once, and Sharon down in the South Central Economic Development District made the comment. She says, "Well, we're gonna title this the power of perseverance, John, because what that means is that you guys have for years and years and years have just gone on and on and on and tried to solve the problem and figure out a way to make it work, even in a little town, 600 people." And it's not just me. I mean, there's a group of people that's important too, and these people have all helped work together to make it happen. And you need to find those people in your community, and they're there. They want to help, and they will. Any questions? Cliff and I could talk about this for hours.
We won't keep you all that long.
Oh, good.
I guess I had a question. You were talking about how, John, you were talking about how the local communities just really need to get their own acts together and start building. And Cliff, you mentioned earlier on with your Central City Home Builders Club that you would get in, start building, and then show the communities that they're able to build there, and then you would fade away and let them get in. I mean, once somebody decides that they want to build, how difficult is it? How long till they can start moving dirt?
It varies a lot from place to place, but it is what it is. One of the problems that we face in a lot of the communities that we go to is they don't have a place to build. They don't have that new subdivision, and that's an interesting battle. And John and I come at this from very, very different perspectives, because John is seeing that empty lot or that building that needs to be rehabbed, and he does that extraordinarily well in his community. It's not the kind of thing that Mesner Development Company can do. We can't do the 1s and 2s. So, when we go into a community, we want to build 8, 12, 16 units wherever we can. And a lot of times that's used as a pathway to start a new subdivision if there's not one there. We swore 2 years ago that we were done with new subdivisions. We weren't going to do any new subdivisions anyplace, and did 3 of them that year. And it's just because that's kind of what has to happen right now to make it work. If you don't have to do the subdivision thing, it's pretty easy to get up and get going. When you have to do the subdivision, there's a lot of grief with that, because you got to find the right piece of land. You got to get the utilities there. You got to put the streets in, and that slows everything down a full building season.
One of the things that we found, you mentioned I'm a vice president of a lumber company, and we tried to do spec houses back in the 90s, a couple of locations, and late 80s and early 90s. And it seemed like when we go in and build one, arrange the contractors, and build the house, everybody had this idea that there was all this blue sky, that this company's making a huge profit on this house. And so we built a house at that time for maybe $170,000, and they'd come in and say, well, you really only need 140 for that thing because you got all that profit built into it. We ended up selling a couple of those basically at almost a loss, if not no profit at all from our company, because the perception was somebody that's rich, some rich developers coming in here and building this thing, and so they drive the price down to nothing. And I made the comment at that time, that's the last time we're going to do that in a small town in Nebraska. It doesn't work. And some people are able to do spec houses and make them work, and more power to them. But we couldn't do it here because the town, everybody had this perception that these people are trying to make this huge profit. And so what I worked on instead was getting a community group involved, a community group of volunteers involved, which is what our nonprofit development corporation is, and let them do it. Then all of a sudden you've got 20 some people on that committee that know exactly what it's costing to build that house. The first 10 houses we built, we never lost a nickel on. We sold them for exactly what they cost us. We didn't make any money on them, but we got the money back out of them to make it profitable for the guy that was selling the material and profitable for the guy that was putting the material together, and the plumber and the electrician and everybody else. And we got our little return on the dollars that we spent on the lot. So we didn't make a bunch of money, but we didn't lose money. A business person in a small town can't continue to lose money doing spec work. And once you do that, you're done. You're not going to do them again. Why would you? It's foolishness. We were able to, with a community group, we had a couple of retired people on there that were on our development corporation. They'd find out what the cost of the place was and what the house looked like. They'd go find their nephew or their children and say, you need to come buy this house. This is exactly what house you need. And it's going to be the best buy you can get because it's exactly the cost of the house. You're not paying extra money for it. And well, we sold a lot of houses that way, and we have a lot of kids in our school because we sold a lot of houses that way. And we have a lot of high property values in our community because we have a lot of those kind of houses in our community.
You mentioned lumber, and I know prices are especially high right now. I mean, but there are a lot of 2020, 2021 specific roadblocks that I imagine you're facing, such as those lumber prices. Are you able to overcome those with your traditional methods, or how are you having to adapt and overcome?
The only answer to that question is you just have to decide if it's what you want to do now. And if it's what you want to do now, do it. Make sure that you've got the product available. Make sure that you've got a firm price. There's no builder or lumberyard in the state of Nebraska or in the world that is going to guarantee a price for very long. If you want the product today, you can pay for it now. You can get it in place. You can get a promise builder's loan and make sure that you've got the dollars available for that product. Get it bought now and use it. You've got a good mortgage interest rate. Go forward with it if you're ready. I've got a lot of rancher customers who have seen things come and go, high and low over the course of time. Some of them they're playing their hold card right now. They're like, well, we think it's going to probably come down again. We were going to do it this year. Maybe we'll wait until next year and see what happens. There's a risk in that, but I guess it's a mixed bag. If the need is there right now, get it laid in, get it bought, protect yourself, get the work done. Who knows what the interest rate's going to be? Maybe the prices will come down, the interest rate might go up. So you're paying one way or paying the other way. If anybody could predict that, boy, they'd be geniuses. Yeah, we'd like to know. Everybody, the whole world would like to know.
I see there's a question on here from Andy Long about infrastructure development and how you make new subdivisions attractive to developers. I touched on that before, but the infrastructure development is really difficult and dangerous in some regards, because first thing you got to do is um, um, you got to right size it. And if you're in a community that has a real housing need, you need to build it big enough that you can start building and work it out. Um, but if you bury a lot of sewer pipe and water pipe in the ground, and you put in a lot of streets and you don't build it out fast enough, then the interest on that infrastructure will eat you alive. So it's not an easy task, and if you do it at the wrong time, if you did it last year and you built it out, and all of a sudden lumber prices go sky high and construction starts, you're still paying interest on that infrastructure. So the things that might help, we did a new subdivision in Central City when the investment club was out building houses. And that really helped because the city administrator knew that he was going to sell a couple lots a year to the investment club alone. So he knew he had sales that were coming along and that was going to happen. If you can tie it in with a program like a rural workforce housing or a tax credit project, that's an opportunity to do the two projects and use up part of your lots. We did that in Hastings, for example. We did a subdivision. There's actually 3 subdivisions that are going on there, all in the same property, but we used the rural workforce housing to use up some of the lots. We used the tax credit project to use up some of the lots, and then you don't have as much hanging out there in the lots that are for market rate housing. You need to figure out how to right size it, but you need to have a plan in place to move things forward. And I will tell you that you can't sell the lots. You got to sell the houses. And the first subdivision we did, I was fortunate enough that I did it with Ray O'Connor, who understood what was going on. And Ray knew that we wouldn't sell the lots, so we were constantly building houses and selling the houses. You have to have somebody involved that will do that for you. If you just put subdivision out there and ask the spec builders to come in and build, it won't work. You have to have a plan that moves it forward and say, we have these programs in place, we're going to get them built. You have to have that, in my opinion.
We were fortunate with our latest subdivision that the village of Stewart handles all of their own utilities, water, sewer, natural gas, electricity. And so they helped with the development of a 7-acre site for, I think 5 house sites, 7 acres. And they made the investment knowing that if we could get it filled up, that we'd get the return on the not only the tax money, but also on the sale of the utilities. And so it worked out pretty well. We've got 3 of the 5 sites that are full. We did one of our duplexes on one of them, and we did a spec house on one, and then one was a private investment. So there are 2 left, but I think it's all going to work out. It's taken probably 4 or 5 years for that to happen, but once again, small town, you have to be a little bit patient. You're not going to sell, but it's nice to have a couple lots for sale that are new, that have all the utilities and everything already there. So
it really helps if you've got a community that's willing to use its utility money, and communities that use TIF. Frankly, without one of those 2, I just don't see how you get it done anymore.
All right, well, we haven't had any more questions come through, so I'll give you guys just an opportunity for any closing thoughts if you have them.
It's dangerous to let John and I get started. I guess my closing thought would be, look to the things that you can deal with within your own community. You need to start with the things that are on that right side of the list, the things that are within your control, within your community, and then the other stuff will come.
Yeah, and as I said before, thank goodness that some changes have been made so that there's more on the right side than there is on the left, because the left side was drying up. We could see that coming for years, and now the right side of that list has gotten viable and provides a great opportunity for communities to do the right thing with their housing, and so thankful that a lot of that's been done. It's not the end of it, and especially if people like me keep raising the price on lumber and OSB board, but I'm not going to take all the blame. But we do have an opportunity with the rural workforce housing to get a lot more done. And a big thank you again to NIFA for stepping up to the plate and adding some dollars to that. And thanks to all the people that worked so hard over the years to get the program started. And a big thank you to all the people that are out there trying to promote housing in the state of Nebraska. Our friends at South Central that do the Home NE webinars every month, and the people that participate in that, all the things that we need to network to continue to provide good, decent, affordable, safe housing for our families, for our children, and for our neighborhoods, and for our communities to continue to grow and be viable. That's the best.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That was a lot of great information, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing your time with us. Thank you also to everybody else who came and watched us online. In addition, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Horizon Bank. This webinar has been approved for 1.5 hours of continuing legal education. If you'd like credit for attending but have not yet entered your license number, please contact us at outreach@nifa.org. Remember, this webinar, along with all previous webinars, are recorded and available at nifa.org under Community Development Training and Webinars, and on our YouTube channel at NIFA Housing. One last plug for housing.ne.gov, a free website for listing and finding rental properties. We will see you again next week when our topic will be work from home trends. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks, Cliff. See ya.
Thank you, gentlemen.
See you soon.